We are so happy to have Heidi here. Welcome, Heidi, and I'm going to pass it to you to get us started.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be with all of you. I am a nearly 60-year-old farmer. I'm a white woman who has quickly graying blonde hair, about shoulder length. And I am really thrilled to be presenting with you today about the adventure that a number of people have joined me in here in Santa Cruz, California. So if we could have our slides, that would be great. Thank you. This first slide is a great introduction, I think, to our work here at Common Roots Farm. It is a picture of our logo, which is a figure, kind of a cartoon figure, half plant, half person, no face, but holding an armful of a sunflower, carrot, and some other vegetables, grounded to a piece of earth. And so on this celebration of Earth Day today, I think it was appropriate to share this image with you because our farm is really about bringing people together to both care for the earth, care for one another, and steward a very unique parcel we have for food production here in Santa Cruz. So next slide, please. Thank you. We are what's called a diversified market farm. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, typically market farming takes place on small acreage, so between 2 and 5 acres usually. We are on a 4-acre parcel. We grow 20 to 25 different kinds of food crops. We also grow 25 to 30 varieties of cut flowers for bouquet making, and also wholesale sales. We practice some very important farming and ecological farming practices here, such as crop rotation, cover cropping. Diversified market farming is really about being as productive as you can on the soil while caring for your soil, which is the key to both nutritious crops and the overall health of any biodiverse environment. The image on the right on this slide is one of our volunteers. She is holding a bouquet or a bunch of what are called dinner plate dahlias. So they're enormous, and they are very colorful, and they are one variety of cut flower that we grow here at Common Roots. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're on 4 acres. We are about 3/4 of a mile from downtown Santa Cruz. So that qualifies us as an urban farm, even though we butt up against a green belt of 640 acres called the Pogonip Open Space Preserve. We have a greenhouse for propagation where we do all of our farming starts and where a lot of our adaptive gardening activities take place. We also have 40 laying hens and do sell our eggs. We have 6 sheep and a couple of farm dogs. We support about 55 families every week during about a 21-week CSA season. For those of you that may not be familiar, CSA means customer supported agriculture, or community supported agriculture is another way people describe it. And it's a weekly subscription to products from our farm. And consumers, local consumers in our area can support us by buying a subscription at the beginning of our farm season. And then we deliver weekly to them a bag or box of fresh produce that includes a variety of the crops that we grow on our farm. We practice what's called low-till methods. We are specifically not a tractor farm. We're a hand tool farm, and we made a very conscious choice to do that, largely because it's much better for our soil and the health of our soil, but also because we want the farmers who work here at Common Roots and participate and have anything to do with our environment to really have an intimate experience with the farm. And we don't think that can happen watching a tractor drive around a field and do the work. We think it happens by getting one's self-immersed in this environment, whether that involves using tools or being present in the space where we have a riparian or waterway, a creek that runs through the edge of our farm. We have a lot of bird life here. The creek is a wildlife corridor. And so there are a lot of experiences one can have, and we don't want power tools overwhelming that experience for any of us. We also have a small hydroponic production element to our farm. Unfortunately, because of COVID, everything we were producing in that greenhouse hydroponic production had to stop because we were selling everything to restaurants, and all three closed. And unfortunately, only one has reopened. So we've shuttered that portion of our production, but I do have some things to say about that I think relate a lot to adaptive gardening and farming. And we also have a small orchard, room for about 60 fruit trees. We've just started that orchard this season. So we have about 25 of our trees in now, and plans to build a future barn, which will be an anchor point for indoor activities on our farm, but also give us the potential to do year-round production, because right now we're a seasonal farm. Next slide, please. I know that's a lot of information at once, but I wanted you all to have the high-level overview of what our operation is. And I think the main reason I like to make this point is that our farm it's almost defined as much by what it's not. So we frequently get confused with being a community garden, which we are not. And we've also been confused, because we welcome farmers of all abilities, we've been confused as a segregated setting that is what some people have called a special needs farm. And we are very clear that we are a production farm that welcomes people of all abilities. And though we are a nonprofit organization, we really work hard to develop excellent products and to involve everybody who has anything to do with our farm with that experience of local food, supporting the food needs of a local community. And this slide is a photo of some of what we call our value-added products. So those of you who might be familiar with farming or this industry know that trying to make a living on a small plot or small acreage is very, very challenging. The nonprofit status and donors certainly help us to do that. But the other thing that helps us is to be able to take things like our strawberry production, our tomatoes, our peppers, and turn excess production into a shelf-stable product. So we have a line of jams, shrubs, if you're familiar with that, cocktail mixes. We sell honey. We have hot sauces, and all of those things are a secondary way for a small farm like ours to turn our production into something that, first of all, can be sold and shipped outside of our farm, because it's all traced back with USDA food safety requirements met. But it's also a way, we like to say, of sending someone else a taste of our farm, and being able to have that experience carry on throughout the season, even though right now our season is about a 9-month experience of growing. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is an image, an overhead image taken by one of these drones with a camera. I'm not very tech savvy, and so this is not a conference to admit that, but I think it's better to be transparent and tell you that I have no idea how to fly one of those things or how to get photos. But we do have people who have been interested in following the progress of our farm over time from an aerial view. So we periodically take photos of the farm, and it does give us an opportunity to kind of investigate the layout and see how production is doing from a higher level in certain areas of the farm where water conditions might be different, for example, shade conditions and so forth. But what is pictured in this image is the row crop portion of our farm. So there are a number of different rows with various products. Various crops, pardon me. What you will see in a market farm should be a diversity of different kinds of things growing at all times. In the upper portion of this photo, there is a fallow field. That is where we graze our sheep. And so where where that area is not cropped currently, but because of our crop rotation plan, things move throughout the farm based on plant families. The structure in the upper left is our accessible greenhouse. Next slide, please. I'm especially excited to talk to you about adaptive gardening and really what I prefer to call accessible farming, because our goal at Common Roots is to be an organic farm where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in particular join with others to grow healthy food, beautiful flowers, and build relationships that sustain all of us. And well, next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit more about all of those elements. You know, in light of wanting to share what we do to make farming more accessible to everyone who's interested in coming here, I really think of this as something that mimics what we would imagine or hope for in the built environment around universal design. So adjacent to our farm is a new pocket neighborhood that was recently constructed with universal design principles in mind. And those basic things that I think all conference participants here are going to be very familiar with, and you don't need any reminding of. But those are also features that we are trying to have at our farm. So for example, we have installed a perimeter path that circles the entire farm. So it's a pretty long path, and it's made of a permeable paving surface that is itself very ecologically friendly. It's made of recycled plastics, and it's called True Grid, and that's a brand name. But it's basically a snap together grid that stabilizes gravel. When we first came to our farm and began to work the land and get an idea of what would grow well here, our son, who is a 26-year-old young man who uses a power wheelchair, was having a really tough time getting around, because even during the dry season, which is most of the season here in Santa Cruz, you know, we have a gopher pest problem on the farm. We have a lot of divots that appear in different places throughout the farm, and it made for a very uncomfortable and bumpy ride in his chair, but it also made it difficult for him to just navigate around the farm. And as soon as we had any rain, the farm really became completely inaccessible. And we knew we wanted to address that, but we weren't entirely sure how we wanted to do it and with what products. But this True Grid has turned out to be something really useful for us. We have an 8-foot wide perimeter path that surrounds the farm. And really important to us, it leads to all the major work areas of our farm. So if you're coming to work with our animals, if you're doing plant propagation in our greenhouse, if you're working in our post-harvest area after we've harvested and you're washing and packing out produce, all of those areas are now wheelchair accessible on our farm. And that has been really important to us, because if we're going to welcome farmers of all abilities, we really need to get serious about what we need to do in the infrastructure and the physical environment to make that possible. I'm going to talk much more about a specific raised bed garden that we have, where what I would distinguish as gardening activities versus production farming is taking place. And that area is also paved with True Grid, so it's all wheelchair accessible. But in that area, we have installed a series of varying height raised beds. We have roll under beds called Terraform that I'm going to show you some photos of later, that are actually U-shaped beds that can be rolled into and accessed from 4 sides. We also, as I mentioned, have an accessible greenhouse. And it's of course more than just having a surface that someone in a chair can access and roll on and not get stuck, or not have inadequate room to turn around or to access work areas. But we also have tables of varying heights that are roll under tables. We have vertical growing in our hydroponic production, as well as horizontal growing, lots of different ways to allow people with different physical abilities, whether or not they're using a wheelchair, to access the production components of our farm. We've also done some little farm hacks, like what we call a roll under egg drawer. So where we have our production laying hens, we have an area, several of the nesting boxes that are easily accessed and can be used by anyone. Again, a universal design principle applied to a natural setting like our farm. Takes a little creativity and certainly a commitment, but I'm here to hopefully demonstrate that it's very, very possible. We also carefully select tools. We lay out our beds on the production or cropping side a little bit differently than you might see on a typical production farm. And the only difference really is that we widen the area, what's called a furrow, between beds, so that folks who may not be familiar with farming, may not be very steady on their feet, may have issues where they're concerned about not being able to stay off of walking on a bed top where the plants are actually produced. We just widen those furrows a little bit so it's a non-issue. A little bit like, I think of it as like widening a doorway on a building. You know, unless you measure it, you don't even know that's the case if it's been built out accessibly from the beginning. And we're trying to do that, apply that same principle on our farm. So those are the physical feature elements to what we have done to make Common Roots more accessible to our public. But we've also, of course, are trying to create a culture of welcome, a culture that allows everybody, regardless of their ability, to feel like they have something to contribute here, because they do. A farm is a quite, if you're not familiar, successful farming is quite a complex endeavor that involves many, many different jobs with many, many different talents needed to accomplish those jobs. And there's always work to be done. Farmers work quite hard, and I have learned. And so being able to have things like flexible scheduling, having partner farmers if someone needs assistance in the field, either to learn a task and to get comfortable with it, or because it's more fun to pair up with someone. COVID has made challenges there, of course, with proximity, but it's also been a real advantage to be in an outdoor work environment for our mental health. Those of us working at Common Roots have really felt fortunate to weather this pandemic in a largely outdoor setting. So that's been really great. We have a saying here called "no pity produce." We talk about how at Common Roots, we want customers to support this farm because they really like what we're growing. They feel like these are the best strawberries they've ever tasted, the longest lasting bouquet they've ever bought, whatever. But we certainly don't want people to purchase from us because of the overlaying social mission that we have. That's great, but that's a sale that I'll get once. It's actually even not so great. What we really are about here is not highlighting the reality that people with disabilities can do farming. We know they can. What we're really trying to do is be a local trusted source for healthy produce that's grown with really good, sound ecological practices, where if you're buying from us, you know you're getting food that has not been treated with chemicals, that the soil has not been treated with herbicides or pesticides, that we practice all these tried and true scientific methods for having good production and healthy soil and carbon sequestration and all those things that allow us to be good stewards of our land and allow the land to give back to us, in the future if we take care of it. And so that's really important to us. We've also made some adaptations here around scheduling and staffing so that we can, for example, accommodate. We have several young adults who have done the paid internship program through the state of California's Blueprint on Employment for People with Disabilities. And that's been great, but it doesn't always line up with the farm season or the farm schedule. So we found ourselves trying to be flexible as a staff to make sure that we can welcome young adults who are interested in exploring agriculture, horticulture, anything related to farming or gardening as a career. We are really pleased to be able to be a site where they can learn those skills and come to us for an additional education and the work experience of, what is this industry like, and what are the jobs available in it, and what are the skills I need to be successful at it. So we're pleased to be a partner in that program as well. And then I think the main thing about our culture is that we just assume competence, right? We're working with a great diversity of people, and we want to assume that the folks coming to us know themselves best, know what they can and can't do. We encourage people to be outside their comfort zone a little bit and try new things, because there's so many different things that are happening on a farm. And we love to hear what people might be really interested in caring for chickens, for example, or really interested in greenhouse work. And we want to make that possible, but we also encourage people to get out of their comfort zone a little bit sometimes and try some new things and help us figure out. We always refer to ourselves as a learning farm, because really, if you're working with nature and doing any endeavor like this, the learning is endless. But also we have a lot we can learn in working with different people to make the farm a place where they can be successful and they can have an enjoyable experience, and they can learn something too, and they can teach the rest of us. So that's very important to us. Next slide, please. A lot of my talking, so I'm going to take a little break here and just let you see, for those of you who are able to see the slide, this is a photo of our perimeter path that I was talking about. And in the foreground is a very large Great Pyrenees dog. His name is Blue, and he is the livestock guardian for the sheep that live in the pen that is pictured behind him. And this photo is really to give you some idea of the scale of our farm. It is small, but this path, again, allows, we intentionally placed animals as well as our work areas along this path to have the greatest likelihood that people, that everybody would be able to access those features. Next slide, please. This slide is a slightly overhead view of what we call our seed to salad garden. And I mentioned this earlier. So in the foreground of this photo is a large shade canopy under which are about 6 wheelchair accessible picnic tables. And that area is all paved with True Grid and has a series of raised beds around the perimeter of the seed to salad garden. And that garden faces out onto a continuation of our perimeter path, which is also visible here, which is cutting through what is now the site of our orchard. So the orchard, the trees are planted on both sides of this path. And again, I mentioned that we'll have room for about 60 fruit trees here. Next slide, please. So in our seed to salad garden, we really envisioned this space as a teaching garden. We wanted to be able to take the production that we do on the field, and by production, I mean row crop farming, that is happening on, in our case, 100-foot long beds throughout our 3 acres. And that can be very intimidating. Some folks who have not farmed before and are unfamiliar with with agriculture in general, can take a look at a 100-foot bed of tomatoes next to 3 other 100-foot beds of tomatoes and feel like, oh my gosh, where do I start? So what we're doing in our seed to salad area is we're growing the same row crops that we grow in the field in raised and roll under beds. We're making the exact same techniques happen in a more intimate setting. And we think a more accessible setting. Very difficult for my son, who does use a power chair, to access row crop farming. But he knows how tomatoes are trellised, how to cover crop, what the practice is for pest management. He understands and knows and is familiar with all of those things because we do the same practices in our raised bed garden, in our seed to salad garden. So we found, which is, I think, a real benefit to everyone, part of accessible farming is also being inclusive. And in our case, we have, for example, master gardener clubs or organizations that do classes at our farm, and they love this area because it's a really comfortable teaching area for groups. We have the Santa Cruz Bee Guild that comes once a month, and they're beekeepers from all over the area, do teaching and have classes. But it then becomes something where, in the milieu and in the environment, we may have people with disabilities who are attending those same classes as people who don't have disabilities. And the reality is they're all going to the same class together. Everybody's, having the opportunity to learn whatever the topic of the day is. But because our seed to salad area does have a place where an accessible van can drop folks off, does have this paved surface, does have accessible tables. Those are all the things that make it possible for us to be serious about inviting everyone. And that's a real priority for us. We also have some different tools that I'm going to show a little and talk a little bit about later as well. And lots of partnering opportunities. I mentioned Master Gardeners and the Bee Guild. Those are just two. We also have this really nice, and I say nice because it was free, built out of scrap wood that we had around the farm, takes advantage of the natural slope on our property. But because this very creative guy came and built this for us, it's basically a variable height potting bench that runs the length of our seed to salad garden on one side. And because of the slope, it's great for folks who prefer to stand and do potting. It also works for people who prefer to be seated. It also works for people who are using wheelchairs. And so that kind of access and the ability to work together on projects, which is so common for I think, doing high quality farming, that's all possible because of the physical infrastructure that we've put in. Next slide, please. So here's our seed to salad garden in action. This photo depicts a view from the orchard side of our farm looking into the seed to salad area. This is the potting bench that I was just describing. In this photo on the left is a young man with an intellectual disability who is doing some potting in one of our adapted trays that I have a close-up photo of to show you a little bit later. But it's a tapered tray that is maybe about 2.5 feet wide. It's a square, actually, square, but it's tapered and has an edge so that you can work soil, what we call germination mix if you're doing seeds, potting soil if you're taking seedlings and potting them up to something larger. And that can be done right in front of you in a way that the soil doesn't spill out. It's easy to mix because you have this container. And we have lots of these trays, and so we can accommodate many people working at once in this area. On the right of the photo is a young man using a wheelchair who is doing the same thing. He's learning seating. My son, as I mentioned, who is also a chair user and has use of his left hand only, mixes all of the germination mix for our propagation that probably is about 4,000 plants every season. He is one of the people responsible for doing that. And he has learned the correct moisture content and so forth so that we can fill what are called cell trays with the germination mix. And then he does not have the fine motor ability to do the seeding, but in partner farming, he can get the trays ready and he knows how to do that at just the right amount of moisture, which really matters for proper seed germination, and then can hand that off to someone else, and his partner does the sowing, and then he goes back and covers those seeds, and then it goes in our greenhouse, and within about a month it's out on our production farm. So that's sort of the idea of what can take place in this seed to salad area. We can sow crops for the field here, but we can also sow crops that go directly into those raised beds. Next slide, please. This is just another view of that same potting area with an individual using a wheelchair. And in this photo, there is a little bit more obvious, perhaps, that the accessible tables are under the shade canopy. And so that area has really also ended up doubling as a picnic area or just a break area for folks, which has been nice as well. Next slide, please. So the image on the left of this slide is of some of our participants from a local day program doing soil sifting. We take soil mixes and they have to be a certain texture for seeds versus for potting. And so these young adults are sifting that with a special tool, and it's a plastic, like a plastic tray that has a screen, a metal screen at the bottom. And as you move the soil through that screen, it sifts out the larger chunks that we don't want in the seed mix. And the container that's beneath that sifting tray is the container that then holds the correct seeding mix, which then gets filled with water and mixed together for putting in trays. So they're learning the different steps of propagation here. The image on the right is something I'm really excited about because I just learned about this. Probably many of you already knew this device existed, but somehow it escaped me. This is a switch operated watering can. We have at any given time, at least 3 very large greenhouse tables in our greenhouse that are filled with seed trays of seed starts at various stages of development, and they all require water multiple times a day. We do have the potential for an automatic watering system, but we don't really like it because it doesn't allow us to keep close attention on what's happening in any given tray, whether there's any disease developing, if the plants are growing the way they should, if the dryness or moisture level is proper. And this student this is a young woman in a post-secondary program who came with an OT, who is the gentleman pictured on the left with her. He's holding the watering wand, but she's operating it with a switch on her headrest of her chair. And this is a job we need done a lot in the greenhouse. And by experimenting with different things, we found a way for this student to take some responsibility in our propagation setting in the greenhouse for keeping our starts watered. So it's just a great tool and just another example of how we can bring different elements that are needed on the farm, different tasks done in slightly different ways than a person without a disability might perform them, but nevertheless, the essential tasks are getting done. And that's a row of hot peppers that she's watering there. So next slide, please. This is an older photo from our greenhouse that depicts when we were doing hydroponic production. So in this image are 3 figures. The one on the far left and far right are volunteers working in the hydroponic greenhouse, and the person in the middle is my son, and he has in front of him what we call towers. They are long trays that look a bit like rain gutters or something that you might have along your house, maybe about 6 inches wide and about 6 feet long. And they are placed vertically in the back of that, in the background of this photo. You can see them hanging vertically. They hang from these racks. And as the product grows, the rack can be removed. The tower can be removed from the rack and put on a table, and anyone who can access that table can then access the product. In this case, these are head lettuces that are just coming on, and we were experimenting at this point with spacing of the plants and so forth. But what it also did was it does make the ability to harvest a crop like lettuce that typically my son using his chair would not be able to get into the lettuce field and do, but we're actually harvesting it. And with hydroponic production, there's a lot of controversy about this in the organic farming world, and I won't open that hornet's nest right now, but just to say that I am a believer in having some hydroponic production in our setting, because it really does allow for harvesting tasks in particular to be available to everyone. And that's a more difficult thing for us to achieve in the field. One of the walls behind these men we were growing 4 different kinds of mint, and we called it our mojito wall because we were selling to a restaurant bar that wanted fresh mint for their mojitos. And so, we talked about people coming in and harvesting from the mojito wall. But you can, if someone is ambulatory, they can walk between these racks and harvest from the vertical production. Or, as I said, the racks can be removed, set on a table, and it becomes horizontal and accessible to someone seated. So next slide, please. So on the left is actually our mojito wall. I forgot I had this slide here. So for those of you who are looking at the slides, on the left is a young man in the background who was one of our PIP, our paid internship program participants, learning hydroponic farming. Next to him is our volunteer who is an expert at that. And they're, I think at this point, checking the health of the plants. But along that rack of vertical towers that I described is a pretty solid wall of green mint. I forget which variety. This might be chocolate mint, it looks like. But anyway, this is what the hydroponic production allows for. And one thing that's really kind of a geeking out on farming thing, but one of the things that's really fun about this is that though you can have pest problems in a greenhouse, certainly they are reduced. And what we all love about this is you never, ever have to worry about gopher damage when you're growing vertically. We have a huge gopher problem on our farm and a lot of crops get destroyed. And so one thing that's really nice is the gophers can't get to this. So we appreciate that a lot. The image on the right is of a young man with autism who is sorting tomatoes here, it looks like, for our CSA boxes. And to his right is his provider who is supporting him in that work. And so it's, another example of the many tasks that need to take place on our farm. Next slide, please. We do a lot of different things with tools to be creative. Some of them are available on the market and some have to be created. So the image on the left is a photo of a welded harvest cart that holds what we call a harvest tote, which in this case is carrying strawberries, pint baskets of strawberries. And on the back, there's a hook on this cart that has a bucket in it. And the bucket is what we call the bad berry bucket. So as we go through a bed of strawberries, we have to remove bad fruit as well as harvest the marketable fruit. Bad fruit goes to the chickens, nothing is wasted. But this cart allowed us to make it easier for people, including people like myself who are a little bit older. And, strawberries are pretty back-breaking, labor-intensive crop if you're doing it for long periods of time. And this just raised the whole operation up a foot or so off the ground with a wheeled cart that can be pushed through our furrows. And so we're building more of these because they're working really well. The image on the right is 2 people taking a wagon full of compost up to another area. And something as simple as buying a wagon that has a handle like this one. So this handle is more of a triangle shape and it's large, and 2 people can grab that handle. And so if carrying something through a wagon is too difficult for one person to do alone, or it's just a task that's more enjoyable shared, if you buy the wagon that has this kind of handle on it where 2 people can easily grip it instead of a single grip handle, people can share the task and it's more accessible. Next slide, please. So this is a photo of the sifting tray I was mentioning earlier that has a screen on it, and sitting inside of that is the tray we use for propagation that holds soil, and an assortment of plastic tools. We have found that it's really great to have lighter weight tools available to people for whom metal tools, which are typically our preference because they last longer, are not a feasible option. And so we have cultivators, scoops, trowels, self-opening scissors that can be used to deadhead anything that doesn't have a super thick stem. So these are just some simple off-the-shelf kinds of ways to make this activity of gardening more accessible to more people. Next slide, please. These are the roll under beds I was describing earlier. So on the left is an image of what is called a terraform roll under garden bed in full swing with lots of crops growing. It's a U-shaped bed. On the image on the right shows the terraform bed without soil or any planting in it, but it is a three-sided plastic formed mold that allows a person in a chair to sit at it or a wheelchair to roll up to it. Many people think that raised bed gardens are a solution for folks using wheelchairs, and they're not. You know, they require you to garden sort of sideways, and it's ergonomically poor and not a very satisfying experience. But a bed like this that can be rolled under and accessed from your left side or your right side or directly in front of you, and the soil and material is all right there, is a much better solution. These are very commonly used in Europe. This particular one is made in France, and our farm has just ordered 5 of these so that we can add them to our seed to salad area. Next slide, please. This is an image of the raised beds I was describing. So while they are a poor option for people using wheelchairs, they are a great option for people who cannot get low to the ground. And so we find these beds to be not only attractive, but also a nice way to bring the plant closer to an individual. And you can have people sit in chairs around them if you want to. We have a series of folding chairs in that area, and so people can use what they want. Most people prefer to stand and do that. A lot of our students that we have seem to like to water, and that's kind of nice because these beds appreciate more watering because they dry out faster than crops that are in the soil. And so we need that task done frequently. And again, we try not to automate where somebody can have an experience that is closer and more intimate to the plants and the environment than just flipping a switch. So these are all hand watered beds at our farm. Next slide, please. This is an image of a young man working with his partner farmer. He is not verbal, and he is selecting from a series of icons on a board that they designed that would allow him to drive what task he wants to do on the farm. So in this case, he's in the middle of I think a cherry tomato bed, but looking to either do the next part of that. I'm not sure. It's not clear from the image what he's selecting from, but he may be choosing to be the one to harvest versus the one to carry the tote. He may be being offered a selection of doing something different, but the intention here and the point is that he's the driver, right? He's making the decision, and we are doing the work of trying to make that communication accessible to him. Next slide, please. This is, these slides are images of the roll under nesting box that I described earlier. The image on the right is of I would say 2 or 3 year old child with his sister in the background. And he has just discovered that if he climbs up the steps to this nesting box and flips open the lid, he can find eggs. And the image on the left is that same coop on the other side of it, has a roll under nesting box, and you don't see the lid open on here, but this young man is using a wheelchair, has what's called an egg crate on his lap and several eggs in that egg crate, and he's also able to collect and harvest the eggs for us. So next slide, please. The point of this is really, these hacks and these designs work well for everyone. And by the way, the steps to get to that coop are movable and portable. So when we have young children, we pull them out so they can reach. And when someone else is harvesting, we just push them out of the way. This slide has two different images of the same young man. He is blind and he is a regular on our farm now, chose to do a post-secondary internship with us. And on the left slide, he is getting familiar with raspberry propagation. Raspberries are a perennial crop, and so they're available in winter to propagate when many other things are not. Our farm dog named Summer is in the foreground there, checking him out because she's very friendly and wants to meet everybody on the farm. And on the right is an image of this same student using a tool called a broad fork. A broad fork is a very common tool in market farming. It aerates the soil. It's like a giant pitchfork, but it has two handles, and you stand on the horizontal crossbar that holds the two handles together. And below it are four tines of about a foot long each, and they are pushed into the soil by stepping on the top of the broad fork and then bending it back with both arms and the weight of your body to crack, what we call crack the soil, to aerate it, which is much, much easier on the soil than tillage, but accomplishes the same thing. Next slide, please. This is an image of one of our sheep meeting our farm dog, Summer. We have a volunteer who is leash training our lambs. We have 3 lambs, and she is leash training them. And this image is of her with the sheep on a leash while the sheep and the dog are greeting one another. But again, if we train up our animals early on to be, comfortable around people and not skittish, these animals do come up from the pen where they stay or where they graze on leash up to the seed to salad area, so that students, young adults, anybody who's visiting the farm can have an interaction with animals, which we think is fun. Next slide, please. I will tell you that my own teenage son told me that, Mom, you need to get animals. When we first got to the farm, he said, nobody wants to snuggle up with broccoli. So we got some animals. Who's impacted by inclusive farming? I would argue everyone, that it benefits everyone to do the extra steps we have done to make our environment accessible. The young man on the left is my 9-year-old neighbor who has never done anything on a farm, recently moved into the housing community adjacent to the farm. We needed somebody to help raise some chicks to live in our orchard and keep some of the pests down. And he was very excited by this possibility. And so 2 months ago, he and I went and got 7 48-hour-old chicks, and he has been raising them for us. They are now old enough to be what are called pullets, and they're in our orchard now. And he checks on them every day, holds them, brings them out to the seed to salad area when we have visitors so people can interact with them. And he, of course, has tremendous pride over this and has been really excited, and his whole family has been following the progress of these chicks. But everybody wins. These are animals that provide fertility on our farm, will eventually provide eggs, do a lot to eat bad bugs, but they're also a lot of fun. And he's doing that for us. The image on the right is of 2 young adults who are sharing the task of adding compost from a wheelbarrow onto the planting beds. And both of these individuals have intellectual disabilities. One is verbal, one is not, and they both are sharing this task and did so for about an hour to help prep the beds for planting. Next slide, please. So who benefits from inclusive farming? I said everyone, but to be more specific, aspiring farmers and entrepreneurs are focused on this slide. So the image on the left is, again, my son having potted up, I'm not sure what that crop is, looks like broccoli, into pots for our plant sale. Behind him, giving him 2 thumbs up, is a somewhat blurry image of our farm manager who was taking a break while he was out propagating near the greenhouse on a nice day. and for whom this is very meaningful work. And he, I don't think, would have much success finding typical employment, but he is contributing in very meaningful ways to our farm and really enjoys it. And I would argue is part of the entire community here of doing something really valuable that the rest of the community recognizes, which is producing really great, farm products, tasty products, flowers. Very little of the cut flower industry in the U.S. is organic, but we are, and we're very proud of that, and we promote that fact. The image on the right is one of my staff here on the farm. This is an image of the back of him. I think he might be holding a weed whacker here, but he's showing off his coveralls that he had just had made. He had worked with us. We were the first paid employment experience he had ever had, which surprised me because he was terrific at his job right away. But he has since branched out and developed a landscaping and gardening business for himself. And he's showing off the back of his coveralls, which say Matthew Schumacher Landscaping and Gardening. So he comes to our farm twice a week and helps us with groundskeeping work. Again, we don't use herbicides. So Matthew uses lawnmowers and weed whackers to keep our weed pressure down on and around the farm so that we're not having to treat weeds with any chemicals. But he's had enough success with that and enjoys it that he's now doing his own landscaping business and looking for clients. So we're really proud of him. Next slide, please. A few images of more people who I think benefit from our setting. Upper left image is a mom and her son. I think bringing crop residue, leftover spent crops to our chickens, it looks like. On the right is an image of the school bus that brings post-secondary students to the farm. I really think school districts have a better alternative in my view. This is my personal bias, so I'll admit to it right now. It really drives me crazy when I see bus after bus going to the mall, and malls are great and it's a nice thing for young people to do, but I really, really want our farm and places like it to be a natural setting alternative to the mall where people can have a different experience of the natural world, know a little bit more about where their food comes from and know how to grow it themselves, which is the skill you learn here. The image in the lower left is of a young man sitting on the True Grid before it's been filled in with gravel. So again, this is our permeable paving surface. He is looks like having a conversation with a chicken on the other side of the True Grid. This young man has autism and is just really loves. We are out here on the farm. We find him seated anywhere, sometimes down, in this case, in our post-harvest area, sometimes in the animal pen, sometimes along the perimeter path. But again, the culture of welcome, the culture of tolerance that we're trying to create, it's all good. And that's his way of experiencing the farm. And we're thrilled about that. So this is an image of him hanging out with a chicken. Next slide, please. Other benefactors of our efforts, I think, the natural environment itself. These are images of us doing habitat restoration along the creek that runs the back corridor of our property, removing photos of volunteers removing non-native species and then replanting native species. Kids have a great time. I think if you give them the opportunity to be in a natural setting, it is very natural for them. The image on the left is of a probably 4 or 5-year-old girl with her boots on, standing right in the middle of our creek. Like she just got right in when her parents were here helping doing habitat restoration. And that kind of exploration, I think, is healthy and wonderful for all of us. Next slide, please. Again, some more images. One of the things we've noticed has happened on the farm is because we have sheep on, a leash like we do in the lower left image, and sheep in the upper left image, The woman who volunteers and has leash trained our sheep is interacting with a group of students from UCSC who are, enjoying just hanging out with the sheep on again the true grid surface that we use for paving, and the sheep come up and walk all around there and are happy to be greeted, and even happier if you have treats in your pocket. But they're having that experience. The image on the right is a group of people who we invited. We actually opened up our sheep shearing, which happens once a year, to the larger community to come watch. And so this is an image of the sheep shearer shearing one of our sheep in the background, and in the foreground is a family and a number of different people just watching, young kids, adults. Sheep shearing is not something you see a mile and a half from Santa Cruz downtown every day. So it's kind of a novel event and was really fun, but again, was a chance for both people of all abilities to hang out and learn something about this process. The sheep shearer was willing to talk a little bit about what he does, how he does it, and works for a company that sells wool products. So he had a lot to say about that too. And it's just a very interesting guy and a fun event. Yes.
This is Megan. We are almost at time. We've got like 3 minutes.
Okay.
You have so many fans that want to come visit your farm. So
oh, great.
The first question that we have, if you're okay taking a few questions.
Absolutely.
Cool. The first question is, what months are you operational, and do you have public tours?
So we do. So yes, and we do. We are operational pretty much from end of February. It depends a little on the rain, but we usually get started in our greenhouse in February, and we go through the end of November. That's our production season. And if you email us through the website, which is commonrootsfarm.org. We do set up tours both for volunteers and visitors, and we have those right now about twice a month. And so if you send us an inquiry about that, we will send you the schedule.
Excellent. And this is Megan again. And if you check out their website, you'll see their store, and they have some delicious looking hot sauces and jams and things. So I suggest giving them a gander. We have lots and lots of praise, lots of people that think it's a great idea. One of our other questions here is, do you work at all with California Agribility?
I don't, but I am familiar with California Agribility, and I would like to learn more. That's a recent learning for me, and I need to learn more. So no, I'm not very familiar. I just know they exist.
Well, we are happy to help partner you with them. We work with Cal Agribility at Ability Tools a lot, so we'll make that connection. Heidi.
Thank you. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and then another question here from Alex. Do you have partnerships with the Department of Rehabilitation or other agencies to put people in internships or job training?
So not directly with those agencies, though we sign contracts with Department of Rehab to host those internships, but we typically work with the supported employment organizations in our area who are, in touch with folks who would like to do the internship, and then we become the site where they get placed. So it's an indirect relationship with Department of Rehab through the supported employment organizations.
Excellent. And we have time now for our drawing. We've been doing prizes throughout this conference, and we're excited to be giving away a gardening package gift for this session. So I'm going to go ahead and randomly scroll through our participants, and my mouse, I have landed on the winner of this package is Ciara Aller. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk if you want to share where you're at, Ciara.
Hi, you guys. So I am in Northern California in Redding, where there's lots of mountains and fields and all of that. And so I actually just started a strawberry patch with my kiddos. And we're going to raise ladybugs this summer. So the gardening kit will come in handy.
Congratulations, Ciara. We'll get that package out to you. We have your email from registering. And a huge thanks to Heidi and Common Roots Farm for being able to come present for us. We so appreciated this and the work that you're doing in your community. We're going to go ahead and head to lunch now, and then we'll see you all back in the main session room for our AT Maker session from 1 to 4 p.m. Have a fantastic lunch, y'all.
Thank you.